Welcome back to Gale Force Winds Season 3.
Gale Force Winds podcast is proudly sponsored by Newfound Marketing, a digital marketing agency located in St. John's, Newfoundland. Visit our website at newfoundmarketing.ca to find out how we can help your business grow. Newfound Marketing, a complement to your marketing team.
Going, all right.
Tell us about this wine and pour your mom a glass.
All right, I'll tell about it. So this is a wine called St. George. We're sitting on Mount St. George, and our friend Coco just come to visit us.
That's fine.
And St. George is a cuvée, and I love cuvées because cuvées are a mix of things. You can things that need to be finished in some way. Let's say you have one variety and you have another variety, and they have excellent characters, each one of them. You can even raise them to a higher level by putting them together. So cuvées in many cases are much more interesting to me. And my idea in creating St. George was to express the character of this mountain and the terroir. So for us winemakers, and I think good winemakers, expression of terroir is the most important thing. So,
Wow.
So where it's from.
Well, you do the honors and open it, and we'll get ready to roll. Pour your mom a glass of wine. Your mom is off camera,
Right?
but we're not going to start till your mom
We're
has a
not going
glass
to leave
of
her out,
wine.
are we? We're not gonna
No.
leave her out. So I better pour enough to last 45 minutes.
This is one of my favorites.
St. George Cuvée.
St. George Cuvée. Actually, this will be at the lobster dinner as well.
Oh, I can't wait.
Well,
Welcome to Mount St. George with St. George and to this volcanic, beautiful wine region. Cheers.
Thank you for the invite.
thank you.
And cheers.
And welcome to another edition of Gale Force Winds, and what a special edition this is going to be. I'm Alan Dale, and with me, not as always, as I normally say, but for the first time, and hopefully for a long time, is Judith Lovis. Judith, why don't you go ahead and kick us off here today?
Thank you, Alan. That's a pleasure to be here. And as you can tell, I'm a little bit nervous about this role that you just put me in, but I was happy to do this for you and for us. And I hope that the Hungarian series will be inspiring, full of optimism and positivism for our viewers. And I have to tell you that it was worth the drive. We drove outside of Budapest 2.5 hours. We had quite a journey. We got to see this beautiful landscape at Lake Balaton, and now we have the first, and I think one of the most inspiring Canadians I know in Hungary. And why don't you introduce yourself,
All right.
Robert?
Well, thank you, Alan and Judith, for having me. First of all, that's a nice pleasure to have you here. So about me, I'm a born Canadian, and now I'm a dual citizen. But I'm a born Canadian. I was born in Tillsonburg, Ontario, and if everyone or anyone knows about that, that's where Stompin' Tom Connors made one of his famous songs.
Okay.
My back still aches when I hear that word, Tillsonburg.
Okay.
So I was born there, and I grew up in tobacco as well. So I grew up on a farm. Both my grandparents and my parents had a tobacco farm, and so I was able to enjoy being close to the land, and that's, I think, maybe the most impressionable thing that maybe stays with me through many years. And I would wake up, and earlier on we still had chickens and pigs and hens and all those things, and we got to enjoy that kind of rural farm life. And later on, it was more about the tobacco and growing tobacco. At the time, it was not as much of a sin then to have tobacco, and since we're out of tobacco, but at that time it was a crop that many Hungarian immigrants, as well as I would say Belgium and Germans in our region around Tillsonburg, we grew tobacco. And my impressions of that time were of the hard work that was involved with the harvests, but the other thing was the good times with the harvest, the spirit of the people that were involved, and the I guess the other benefit was the lovely aromas we got to enjoy when we would cure the tobacco in the kilns in the morning and open them up, and we had this wonderful aromas of tobacco, and that kind of sticks with me in the background.
Many people, Robert, would not even know the tobacco industry, like how it's grown and how it's harvested. Walk us through that a little bit.
Well, you're saying you're from PEI, so there's a little tobacco in PEI as well. But our area was probably the biggest tobacco region at the time. I think it was the 1930s it started to really take off before the Second World War. And it was started on these lands in Norfolk County and somewhat in Oxford County, where the sandy soils were. So these soils were not as desired by most other farmers because they were quite dry, but tobacco loves dry, sandy land. And I think some help from some Virginians and their idea of what kind of land was needed, and they developed the tobacco industry, and that's where there was a marketing board developed over many years, and it became a lucrative cash crop, probably one of the most lucrative cash crops at the time, in southwestern Ontario, and we flourished. So all these immigrant families who decided to buy this cheap land, which was not good for anything else, and it was hard work, dirty work, they were able to make good livings for themselves and their families. So that industry developed and flourished, I would say, until the 80s mostly, and then there was a lot of movement against tobacco, which is understood, and slowly that industry went not totally out, but highly reduced, to the point that our family is out of tobacco for many years, and my brother's now growing ginseng in the same lands, and funny thing, it's very good in sandy soil as well. So so ginseng, another good cash crop that he's dealing with, and then after that, my life shifted into my other part. My father was a engineer and a owner of a construction company and a developer of real estate, and I worked as a young engineer, I suppose, in construction in the early years, and it was very successful, and I enjoyed it and learned so much.
Right.
About complexity. So construction is very complex. And so is winemaking. So, because you have to deal with so many factors to bring something together in a final product. So that was a great learning experience to do that. And then I ended up studying engineering and architecture later, because my love of the arts came at a little bit later stage when I suppose through my parents' adventures into their friendships around the world. They got involved with many people, and my mother's interest in design came into the love of the arts, and so I went into the direction of architecture, and I really loved and excelled at that, and I started working in Canada. No, actually, first in Paris. I went chasing love. Not only of the city, but of a young French woman in Paris, and I was there for 6 months until I realized that sometimes when you move, it doesn't always work out the same way, and so it was a bittersweet relationship to Paris, but I learned so much, and then she came back to Canada to work in Toronto at a very nice firm, and for about 2 or 3 years. Before an economic crash, and I decided then to take a look at what was happening in Hungary at that point, because my father was very interested in what was happening in Hungary after the 89 in the fall of the wall, and how things are changing. So I accompanied him on a trip early on, and we saw how things were changing and the opportunities that might be there. And
Yep.
Had you been back to Hungary many times before '89?
No, once before that.
Yeah.
Once I was back for my parents' 25th wedding anniversary, and I think we were here for a week, and I think at that point I was 15 years old.
Right.
And that was an interesting time, because then it was really the old feeling of Hungary before things had changed.
Mm-hmm.
And landing at Ferihegy 1 airport, and they had the machine guns out on the tarmac, and it was a different feeling for Canadians at that time, and having warm Coca-Cola, and I mean, if you could even find it,
Yeah.
So it was a totally different feeling, but it was really a good cultural experience to see it and taste it, because we had a lot of nice Hungarian food and experiences. It was a very hot summer, but that was my first experience with Hungary.
Right.
And we didn't come this far down the Balaton at that point. I think we only went to Tihan, as far as to Tihan, but we traveled through many parts of Hungary at that time, and to see the beautiful places in the countryside, as well as Budapest.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted you there. You had a question.
That's funny because I had the exact same question in my mind.
Right.
That what was his relationship with Hungary as a child? So I guess
Yeah,
we
I
had.
didn't talk about that, did I? No. So I mentioned that we had a big diaspora of Hungarians. So much so that we had two churches within our region. One was a Greek Catholic, and the other was Roman Catholic. And we belonged to the Greek Catholic church, where my grandfather was instrumental in building the church. And that community had a lot of social events around it, with food and music and culture and dancing. So we had every year 2 buchus, 2 festivals, in the springtime or early summer. And that was a big event with food and a little bazaar and some entertainment. So that was important. Language was important with my grandparents. We spent time with my grandparents quite a bit in the summer, so we were learning the language somewhat. The food, of course, through all my family, including my mother and my grandparents and the ladies who were coming to cook at the church. So we had lots of Hungarian food.
Did you
lovely.
speak Hungarian in the house?
We did a little bit. I mean, as a young child, you don't have long conversations, and they're
Right.
not too complicated.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it got stuck with me. Is
Right.
until I was 10 years old. I suppose we had these kind of simple conversations, and then for another 15 to 20 years, I didn't really speak Hungarian.
Right.
So I had lost most of it, but maybe I had an ear somewhat for Hungarian.
But I know that he speaks very well in Hungarian now.
Well, 30 years.
So in '89, when you made that trip back, things were changing a little bit, and you toured around. What was it about Hungary that captured you at that moment?
Well, at that time, I was deciding to change my career between either probably going to Florida, where my dad had some people that I might have been able to get a job with as an architect, or come to Hungary. And I came for a short 2-month stint in the fall of '92. And what I saw at that time was a really dynamic and interesting environment. It was full of young people, particularly, coming into the city, seeing what the opportunities are, what kind of jobs there were. Even some people were just hanging out, actually, and it was fun. It was lots of fun. I mean, we met people from all over the world. We would get together. We'd travel throughout the country. It was extremely inexpensive for Western standards.
Right.
So we enjoyed the food and the culture and the people. We met with a lot of young Hungarians as well, and that whole interaction, they were excited to meet us and we were excited to meet them, so that was really a nice interactive time. And so when I decided whether I'd go to Florida or Hungary at that point, I decided hands down that this excitement was fun, and I wanted to come back. So I came back, and I landed a job with another interviewee that you will have, which is Michael Kojakar, and they're called CMA at the time. I don't know if it's called CMA anymore.
It is.
It is, yeah. So with CMA, and we worked together for some time before another architectural job. I started with a Hungarian American. So. So that's how I got started in Hungary, and they say some people that and I was never there to see what Paris was like in the 30s, but that Budapest was kind of like Paris in the 30s.
Coming to you from the islands of Atlantic Canada, Gale Force Winds is a podcast anchored in optimism. Join us for a positive conversation every Tuesday on galeforcewins.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Co-owners and creators Jerry Carew and Alan Dale are seasoned communicators and business development experts. Together, they provide an elegant intersection of quality, speed, and affordable pricing in your media campaign. To learn more, visit galeforcewins.com.
So an exciting time. You come back. It sounds like a really vibrant time to be in Hungary at the moment. Tell me from your lens as an architect. I mean, you walk around Budapest, and it must be just a joy for an architect to just walk around and look at the different styles of buildings. That in and of itself must have been so exciting for you.
Well, of course, that was another inspiration for being in Hungary and in Europe. I mean, I experienced that when I went to Paris, this beauty of the old city, and then when I came to Hungary, there was just a different time period of architecture and different styles to be appreciated, and the aesthetics of the whole city were quite dynamic and beautiful. They did that. How the city embraces the Danube, and that the views you have on the Danube day and night are wonderful. And you can go through the districts and see the different periods of architecture in neighborhoods and just walk the streets for hours and see nice details. And yeah, all the way through the modern Bauhaus period, back to the kind of I would say the turn of the 20th century architecture. The Art Nouveau, everything is there, and it's quite beautiful. And that's one thing, you know, I love the environment, being in a great environment, and that was part of it, being in Budapest at the time. Yeah. I mean, at that time it was still a little is grayer, but now it's sparkling, you know, compared to. I mean, it was the street lights were hardly there. I mean, you go out at nighttime, and it was kind of exciting. It's kind of like you're like a spy film or something, but it was quite exciting that time. And then things, you know, over the last 30 years. I mean, you're in a, you know, a modern Western European city at this point, you know.
Right.
So it's a transition that happened before my eyes, really, and that was
So
wonderful.
have you ever lived in Budapest? So you started off in Budapest, or you still live there, or how did you end up at the Lake Balaton?
Well, so my first part of the career was I was working as an architect, and I did that for a relatively short time before I found some other opportunities. And I met a friend through my parents, in fact, who was living in Hungary, Canadian. And we would get together, have lots of fun, first of all, eating and drinking, and also talking about different ideas. And one of them stuck, and I started another business, which was a commercial archiving business. And that thing took off. So to the point where I couldn't even practice my architecture anymore. And we went in the end, to 5 countries with this idea and this service. And that was a totally different part of my life. You know, it was about team building, about how to solve logistic problems, and that was the great joy of that job. Is probably some of the experience from construction and engineering that went into doing something else, and kind of grabbing a tiger by the tail, and that's what it was like. It just grew like mad, and it was a wonderful experience building that team throughout Central Europe. So that was a exciting opportunity to take care of, and at some point I knew I would change. You know, I knew I would change, get back more to my creative side, and that opportunity came in the late 2000s, or not late, I would say the mid 2000s. And our partner, who was an American company, was happy to take our shares, and I would move on to another part of my life.
Of your journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us about that. Tell us about driving out here for the first time.
Well, that actually happened much before. That happened when I was, when I came out here I actually discovered this with my partner, my architectural partner. At that time, she was a woman who had a wonderful house in the next valley, the Cali Medenza, which is also a beautiful region. And we would come here on weekends and enjoy the environment as well as having lots of fun. And I fell in love with this area. I mean, it's a beautiful volcanic region. It's a kind of almost a sub-Mediterranean type of climate. You have the Lake Balaton here, which is gorgeous and adds a total calming atmosphere and a place to have fun. And at that time, where I was looking for something, you know, okay, if this is the place, maybe we kind of find something. I asked her, did she know anything? And one day, she brought me up here, and this building was a total ruin at that point, but the location was the same, as you can imagine, and it, you know, for an architect, that's not a challenge to think of maybe purchasing a place like this and fixing it up someday. And that was 1993, and I was able to buy that in '94. And that was I held the building for a long time. In fact, I had no money to actually even renovate it, but the dream was there. And after many years of doing my other businesses, I was able to put things together, and I was able to renovate it starting in 2009 and then 2012 was ready for the first harvest, in fact. So in between that time period, and as I mentioned, the mid 2000s, I was able to sell our company, and I had time to focus on, you know, this kind of more creative aspect of my career again, you know, from architecture to something technical to architecture again, to architecture, building, and winemaking. So this is the transition I went through, and that was a totally inspiring event in my life.
And this is what excites me so much,
Yeah.
because as a career coach, I meet so many people who want to know more about career changes. How do you pivot your career? So when you learn so many years study and to do something like a profession, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you start being very successful at that. How do you change? When comes the point? How do you decide? How do you make, what is it that motivates you to make that change? But to me, it's fascinating that how someone can go from one industry and go to a completely different, with different skill sets and different work. So it's fantastic, and this is what really
100%.
excites me.
And the courage
That's
to
the
do it as
story.
well, right? The courage to do it. So walk us through that.
I guess first of all, I think the thing to say is, but many people I think are afraid of doing these things, and I can totally understand that. Luckily, I came from a background in my environment, my family environment, where my grandparents, my parents, my father, my grandfather changed a lot what they did. It was not unusual to think that we might change. And I mean, my grandfather came with a suitcase in his hand from Hungary, had to go to Saskatchewan for 2 years under his contract. He moved to Ontario. I think he drove a truck for a while. Then he had a tobacco farm, and then he started building buildings. And so for me, this was in my family culture. And my father did the same. He did he wore many hats. And so for me, it was not unusual. So maybe that's a big part of why I was not afraid.
Right.
And why I did it, obviously, is that I guess things change. And I mean, I had a reason from changing from architecture to this, I guess, logistics and service business. Partly it was because of the state of architecture practice in Hungary at the time. I was a little bit disillusioned by what architects were doing and what they could do, because the first phase of change in Hungary in terms of architecture was supplying buildings that worked, not necessarily buildings that were particularly excellent. Mm-hmm. And I prized my career. When I worked in my profession in Paris or in Canada, I worked with very good architects and teams, and we did superlative architecture. And coming here was very hard to find those places where they were really looking for that. They wanted a building that had a lift and air conditioning.
Right.
And that was it. I mean, that's not it, but I mean, was enough.
Right.
That was enough. So that was not overly inspiring to me as a career move. And at the same time, this opportunity came forward. So that was the change, and I could see the opportunity there to have something that would really grow. And then the next one was the great success of that building gave me the opportunity to do the other one, which got me back to more of that career path that I was really searching for, was the creativity side of things and the love of nature. I mean, getting back to the countryside. I mean, that's what goes back to my childhood again, doesn't it? I mean, being on the farm. And so I guess those are, and not having the fear to do it. I mean,
Right.
so,
But this is tremendously complex.
yes, of course. I mean, that's the
Not
thing.
only in its flavor, but in the whole process.
Yes, it is.
How did you come about that skill, or have the courage to say, I want to try that?
I suppose also that, I mean, my experiences through my life at that time was with again, a complex business like construction and engineering. Second, I'd grown up on a farm, so I wasn't really that afraid of the idea of agriculture.
Okay.
And then the rest of it was about learning another skill, which is the winemaking skill. And that was a step-by-step process, of course, because I knew people in the wine business in Hungary. I'm involved in another winery. We started to do harvests before in this other winery. Earlier on, I had a mentor, so I didn't just kind of do this. I mean, I had a very good mentor from Austria in the wine business. I worked with good colleagues. I mean, I can't do this alone. I have very smart and wonderful colleagues that helped me do this stuff, and you know, the sensitivity to feel what I want to create. I mean, that's the transmission of something that's in your head that you want to put in the glass. I mean, architecture, it's a transmission of something onto paper, and then a paper into a true form. I mean, so you have to have that picture in your mind before you actually start even do it. Or if you don't have that picture, then you don't know what to do.
Yeah,
I mean,
the big difference that I can see is that in architecture, then you create something predictable, right? You have it on paper, and then you will see it manifest in real life. But what about wine? How can you predict the taste? How can you predict the color, the sense, the aroma, and everything?
well, first of all, I'd argue about that. It's predictable, because construction is not predictable. Particularly if you're renovating a building, nothing's predictable.
Oh, okay.
Because there's surprises
So
all over the
maybe
place.
that's not a difference then. That's a similarity.
Yeah, there is, because new buildings are a bit easier, but in renovating buildings, it's not predictable at all, really, because you get surprises all the time, and you have to improvise. With wine, it's not just about, okay, you have a picture, but in the cellar, and you're looking at your wines, because we have lots of different vessels and lots of characters. We have lots of different grape varieties. We have different harvest dates. So you get this motley crew of all sorts of wines, and then when you blend them and you taste them, you are also creating something. It's not just the part about the land or the winemaking. It's about putting things together and knowing the picture you want when you put it together. Of course, I feel that the most important is having great soil, great healthier soil to get healthy grapes and healthy vines. Without that, it doesn't start.
Right.
That's your first step. But once you've got great fruit, then it's a different thing. And I believe also working more natural in the cellar. So let the wines be what they want to be. In many cases, there's a lot of intervention you can have in winemaking, but I have to call ourselves a very low intervention winery. And I want to guide them. I don't want to move them.
Right.
I want to guide them, and then finally blend them, and feel what the nature's giving you in the glass, what are the characters you want to highlight, and that's to me about the terroir. So feeling that the nice acidities, the citrus aspect we have here, the umami you get when it starts to age, the vibration, kind of the vibracity of the acidities, the long length on the palate.
This is exactly what I'm experiencing
Yeah,
right now.
yeah, good.
So these are things that you look for to make something exciting, and once you find that, you get to know that, okay, this move will work a little better than that move, and of course a winemaker's job is much more difficult in many cases than an architect or a designer, because you can only do it once a year unless you do two hemispheres, of course.
Right.
Because and that's the thing of you have to really value winemakers that I think have many years of experience. It really does help.
Coming to you from the islands of Atlantic Canada, Gale Force Winds is a podcast anchored in optimism. Join us for a positive conversation every Tuesday on galeforcewins.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Co-owners and creators Jerry Carew and Alan Dale are seasoned communicators and business development experts. Together, they provide an elegant intersection of quality, speed, and affordable pricing in your media campaign. To learn more, visit galeforcewins.com.
It sounds like the wine is taking you on a bit of a journey here.
It does. It's both. It's both. It's kind of this play between feeling what's in the nature, what's happening in the cellar, allowing things to take place, but also guiding it into the shape you want, at the end.
Now, you had made mention about where we are, and the fruit is great and the soil is great. Talk a little bit about this area, because it's fascinating. You're not looking at it, I am, but of course you get to look at it every day. But it really is remarkable. It is a very special place on our planet where we are right now.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about this region and how that plays into the complexities of this wine.
Yeah, at the very high level, there's some trending about volcanic wines. So our region is one of the many volcanic wine regions within Hungary. It's called we call it again Tanúhegyek, or Witness Mountains. And there are several in this region. Also heading up, Somló itself is another mountain north of here. St. George Mountain, Baracsony, all these little mountains are the remnants of a Stromboli type of volcanic eruptions, which means a very violent type of eruptions through sea or water. And these formations are, quite relatively unique in Hungary and Europe in general, these types of mountains that are left over. So first of all, the geology is interesting, and it's very beautiful as well. It leaves us with soils peppered with all sorts of sizes and shapes of macro to micro basalt, and that's mixed within the soil of what was here before with the Pennine Sea. So as I mentioned before, the volcano is blasted through a sea, and that was the Pennine Sea, and the remnants of the sea are mixed in a melange of these of basalt. So it's quite unique, this mix, and it makes for a great terroir for the types of wines we produce, which are these kind of good acid-driven, complex, and fresh wines. Fresh in all cases are wines. So this region has become important for wine, also that now in tourism as well. Of course, we have many visitors because it's quite beautiful. Cycling and horseback riding and all those hiking have become very important in this region. Gastronomy is building and getting stronger all the time, and there's always something around to do here. And it's just every season brings something beautiful. So I am not bored at all. Not even winter. In fact, sometimes I enjoy winter as much as any other season when it's absolutely quiet and you can have long hikes through the hillsides. So,
of course, we have the Hungarian Sea here. We call it the Hungarian Sea, the Lake Balaton. That's the largest lake in Hungary.
Yes.
And that's quite popular among the Hungarians and as well as other Europeans. And a lot of water sports and a lot of fun activities. So that's really a nice place to come here and visit in the summer as in the winter as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of people coming from all over the world, in fact.
And that is the case.
Yes.
People are coming from all over the world to come here. And
We saw the American flag
on the way up here. Yeah.
On the way up
Oh,
here.
I did. Okay.
So there's an American, a Canadian here.
Yeah.
at this.
Well, somewhere. And a lot of people are retiring here from other parts of Europe. In fact, they come to retire here. Austria, Germany, mostly some from Holland.
The Netherlands.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the secret here? Why are they coming?
But, I don't know. I feel this, but some people, I think they feel they just haven't expressed it. When you come to these mountains, and I come here, let's say after being in the city or abroad for a while, and then you come into the mountain. And maybe it's a silly idea, but this was a volcano, and maybe that root that goes to the center of the earth kind of is projecting some energy out of here, and you kind of get your energy from being here. And with this beautiful, the views we have too, it's energizing, and some few energizing little wines, and you're off, so gastronomy and a healthy feeling out here.
Yeah, you do feel good here. There's no doubt about it. There's a feeling of peace here when you come here, but I feel alive just sitting here. It's amazing. You talk at a very high level about your wines. Tell us about some of your offerings right now that you have.
Yeah, so I mentioned the St. George. St. George is our premium cuvée, but we as I mentioned, we work in a very natural way, And we've been producing another cuvée called the Bohème cuvée, which is a kind of it's a blend not just of grapes from this mountain. It's a blend of grapes from the Balaton region. So that's what we want to express with the feeling of the region here. This is the expression of our mountain. Okay. And then we have our single varietals. And then we have our main varietals are Riesling. UK, in Hungary we call it Rhine Riesling. You also have something called Riesling Italico. We call Olas Riesling here. We blend primarily. We have Sauvignon Blanc, which is quite rare for this region, actually. And we have Furmint, which is Hungary's great white traditional grape, and most known probably abroad, because it's able to make sweet wines, dry wines, sparkling. So we have a sparkling, we have a traditional method sparkling as well, made from Furmint. We have recently planted a few years ago some Kadarka, which is a very traditional Hungarian red grape. So we have our first red wine as of the 2021 vintage. So in all of these wines, the whole idea is to not let the terroir be covered over, the minerality, the saltiness of this mountain. Of course, I didn't even mention that. I mean, all our wines are certified organic, so that's also important. So I mentioned the soil. That part of that whole story is about treating the soils and the vines in a sustainable way, and the way you do not poison the soil, the way they build their own immunity, and you have healthy and clean fruit. And part of that is the certification process for us. I mean, it's not the most important, but it does say something about we are adhering to certain principles. So we have the single vineyards, as I mentioned, and sparkling, and our red. So we have a kind of a full range.
Right, and the wines are shipped all around the world.
They are. I mean, I haven't gone east yet, and I'm looking very forward to doing that. But if you talk about Europe and North America, yes. And recently a new partner in the USA. And in Canada, I've been there for a long time, in Ontario and in Quebec. And now, most recently, I'm going to be on order of Jeremy Bonia from the Merchant Tavern. A nice order. We're going to start in Newfoundland as well.
Oh, wow.
So I've started in Alberta, looking at now BC with a possible new partner. I'm all through Europe, basically, UK, and I've got as far away as New Caledonia in the Pacific, which is a tiny island. I've exported some wines there as well. So it's growing. It needs to grow more. I believe in showing our wines everywhere that wine lovers are. And to experience our terroir. I think our terroir is absolutely as great as any, and that was one of my main goals in producing wines as well. Is many people, and I think I include Canada, have not seen the high quality wines from Hungary. Right. And to me, that was a shame. So one of my goals is to put Hungarian wines on the top shelf. So not just the bottom shelf Hungarian wines, but the absolute top shelf. Right. And because they really have a place there.
There's no doubt in my mind somebody's going to watch this podcast, buy a bottle of wine, and tell parts of this story before they open the wine, because it's a beautiful journey you've taken us on here today. I mean, your journey here, and then allowing the wine to even take you on a journey. It's really quite amazing how it's all come together, which kind of begs the next question, which is, what's next? Is there another career change? Are we staying with this? What does the future look like? I'm excited.
Never say never. I've had 3 careers now, so never say never. But this one is so enticing. I mean, and I love where I am, so I'm not looking at any career changes right now. No, but in the future is really to work further and harder on raising this to the next level. And as I mentioned and referred to, Hungarian wines have not traveled very much or not been recognized very much abroad. We are at a disadvantage to maybe those beautiful wine countries like France and Italy, who have created a history over 200 and some odd years of great market entries and whatnot, and we're just starting. We're just just starting on that curve again. I mean, we had a great history, and this is what we didn't talk about. Hungary had an illustrious history, and some of the top wines in the world. In fact, I'll tell you just a quick story about. I was at the Oxford Food Symposium in Oxford some years ago, where our wines were at a lunch for about 200 people. And a man came up and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Do you know how famous Hungarian wines were?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I know how famous Hungarian wines were." He said, "I have a antique shop in Maine, and he specializes in old menus and wine cards, going back to the 20th century, mid 20th century." Mostly hotels, because most places that had menus and wine cards were only hotels. And he said that Hungarian wines were right there on the top with Burgundy and Bordeaux.
Wow.
In terms of their quality. And of course, you had 2 world wars, and history got in the way and ruined merchant contacts throughout the world. And it's just starting over again. And you know, that's what I'm part of. And I'm working a lot to get our wines into broader markets and to raise the stature of Hungarian wines.
Coming to you from the islands of Atlantic Canada, Gale Force Winds is a podcast anchored in optimism. Join us for a positive conversation every Tuesday on galeforcewins.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Co-owners and creators Jerry Carew and Alan Dale are seasoned communicators and business development experts. Together, they provide an elegant intersection of quality, speed, and affordable pricing in your media campaign. To learn more, visit galeforcewins.com.
A couple of world wars, I agree, and lots of political change in the country, but the grapes never left.
No.
They always stayed, right?
Yeah.
So now it's just bringing that back up to the world stage again.
Yep.
Sounds like you're on the path to do that.
Well, I'm certainly working at it. And I must say, it's a complex business. It's a challenging business. If you want to be successful, I think you need a great deal of passion.
Right.
Because, like I say, in these complexities, I mean, you're dealing with weather and nature, so those things always kind of, any farmer will know that. The way things work in marketing in the world anymore in sales is also quite complex in many ways. So, so that's an interesting challenge for us.
But to me, like wine is like food, so people will always drink wine. We'll never stop drinking wine.
No, I would no, never, never.
I want to take you back a few years. If you can, in your mind, visualize, you know, being a young person smelling the tobacco, drying, as you say, or harvesting, and that's a wonderful smell. Did you ever envision this in your life, being in this place and time?
I've done that with myself many times before, and I think if I was 19 or 20 years old even, and saying that I would be in Hungary, having had a business, having 3 children, and to have a winery on Lake Balaton, that would have been the farthest thing with my mind.
Right. Yeah.
So it is to me a real big journey.
Right.
Yeah.
And what does Hungary, the country, mean to you?
Well, listen, that's a beautiful thing in many ways, because it's the beginning, obviously, because in many ways, because in some ways, you know, Canadian culture to me was the default culture. Because I was born in Canada, so it's interesting. It's a default culture, right? And I can say enough good things about Canada. At the same time, our Hungarian culture in Hungary was very strong. So our whole family was imbibed in Hungarian culture. I mean, a lot of it was speaking Hungarian, and the kind of the family culture, the church, and the social culture we had. So when coming back to Hungary in '92, I didn't have the expectation that I'd be here this long, but it's a beautiful country. It's a really beautiful country. As for a small country, it has so much to offer of European culture, of beauty, of food, of its wine, it's got a history that's very challenged, and it does it does make you think how people have been through all these years. I mean, it's a much longer conversation than that, but so to me, it's beautiful. Sometimes it's got some melancholy to it because of the culture, but you can see that in its music and in its culture as well. So it's music and its film and everything. You can see this, and it comes out, and the people you talk to, and the way things happen in Hungary. It's going on. It's a great set of people with intelligent and people, and I think they're creating a new start, I guess, for the country. It's still starting. It's after 30 years, but I think it's still starting.
That's amazing to think, right? It's still starting. Can you imagine if you were a young person looking at the world right now and deciding where your career would take you? What an amazing thing to say. Here's a country that's still starting.
Well, it is, because it's still grappling with a lot of things that are still legacy. So I think that's why I say it's still starting.
Yeah, bit of a blank canvas still.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's still lots of things happening.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Judith, your thoughts today?
Well, I immensely enjoyed this conversation, and I have only one question left, maybe two. That was your Canadian roots or upbringing an advantage doing business in Hungary? How do you find that? With this Canadian mentality, that all the knowledge that you had are coming from North America, is it a benefit? Is it your benefit or a disadvantage to do business in Hungary?
Definitely, I think there's advantage because I don't know if it's necessarily the Canadian, but that it's because I lived in the U.S. for 4 years. I didn't even mention that, my university education, and it doesn't matter. I lived in the U.S. for 4 years. I lived in France. I lived in Canada. And I think that openness and culture that I got from this was very important in the way I looked at how to change things. I mean, my first career my second career with the document business was a lot about teaching young people what all this was about having a business and market business and service and things. And so that came from this kind of worldview and Canadian background. So that in that sense it was very important, yes. And understanding how business worked in kind of a Western sense. And so that was very important, of course. Yeah.
Because I think that many Canadians who would come to Hungary would think that they don't know the language, they don't know the place, they don't know the traditions and how to do business in Hungary, but I think they have a huge advantage. They have this international open mindset, as you just said. Yeah. So I think it makes it easier to do business and good business, because you can become outstanding, as you did become outstanding.
Yeah, of course. I mean, everyone has to be savvy, because there are differences you have to try to learn to understand as well. Any culture you go into, there's some tricks you gotta learn. I mean, and that savviness has to be there too, of course. But having a world view is very important. Yeah.
Well, what a wonderful conversation here on Gale Force Winds today. I want to thank you very much for taking us on this journey, as complex as it was, from the tobacco fields through the construction sites and into engineering and architecture, and circling back to the complexity of this wine and this beautiful region and this very, very special part of the world. I want to genuinely thank you for coming on the show and inviting us into your conversation and into your home. And what does the world need more of, Judith?
Wine. More we
and the world needs more Hungary.
More sure. Hungarian wine.
More Hungarian
wine. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Robert, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Alan and Judith.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
See you at the lobster dinner.
Yes, see you at there.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Our goal in Budapest was to shoot 12 interviews with Canadians doing amazing things in Hungary. In addition, we shot all kinds of footage around Budapest. This is some of that footage.
And here we are. Gale Force Winds is on location in Budapest, Hungary. What a privilege it is to be here. But first, we're going to start with a tour of the Parliament buildings. Annika, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, welcome. Thank you. My name is Annika, and I run my agency for welcoming guests and hosts for its Pan Voyage. I have 4 children and I have studied tourism and trade. So I live here in Budapest. I'm Hungarian, and I think that it's very nice that we call Budapest the Pearl of Hungary and the Pearl of the Danube, because you have many sites to discover. And in our construction we can see the Italian Renaissance, because we had some common kingdom with them, and the Habsburgs, which is a very famous Austrian imperial family.
So, Annika, where are we stood right now?
Now we are on the Kossuth Square, which is a main place because it's a parliament building is to be found here. This is the house of the country, as we call it in Hungarian, Országház.
Right.
The first prize is the current parliament. It costed 10 times more as we projected, but we said that finally we have freedom, as I said, in the end of the 19th century, so no money counted. The second prize was this building, which is the major court, and the third one is the other building, which is the Ministry of Agriculture today. Wow. So we start with the visiting of the Parliament building, but before I would like to tell you about a very emotional and important statue.
Let's take a walk over and
Hungary has done many wars, revolutions, and we always had to defend our territory. It's very important that we didn't come here just by chance, but according to our legend, it was a territory which was promised to Hungarians, and in the 9th century we were led by a golden deer to come here. This is why it's more than a territory, it's a homeland for us. This is why we really have to protect and we really have to struggle for it.
Well, that's a great start to our day, and now we're going to go inside the Parliament buildings and learn a little bit about the history of Hungary. So just before we go, though, Danube is dividing 2 cities. We're stood on Buda now.
Pest.
We're stood on Pest.
Buda is hilly, Pest is flat, and it's the source of water and the source of fire. We are here in the corridor, which is joining from the staircase to the main room. Here you have some Hungarian craftsmen in porcelain, pyrogranite. This is to symbolize that the parliament belongs to everyone, from the lowest level of people living in Hungary until the king, and to all kind of jobs. They have their voice and they are really represented here by the deputies. We have a lower chamber and an upper chamber. In the middle you have the dome hall, which is to be found under the dome, and the 2 sides of the parliament are symmetric. So the Hungarian Parliament building was inspired by the London Parliament building. If you see the design, it is a bit also next to a river. And it was very important to have only Hungarian material and only Hungarian people working on the construction. The architect was very famous for many other buildings. We can see his bust in the staircase on the right, but he could not leave, unfortunately, the inauguration of the parliament itself. But for the big feast of 1,000 years anniversary, 1896, he could still be here. This is the main staircase. It's here that diplomatic people and big politicians arrive to enter the dome hall. And on the other side, you have the room which was already used during the Austro-Hungarian Empire with original traduction cabins, because many people lived in Hungary of many tongues, and this is why it was important to make the translation. So we have come out from the main dome hall where we keep the crown of Hungary. It is very special for us because the crown is a personality and the king is ruling in the name of the crown. It has been many times put under the ground, or it has been many times changing or traveling to some places, and this is why the cross is a bit aside now. We have arrived now to the other hall, which leads to the deputies' hall. Here also you have the different people who represent Hungary, also the craftsmen and also sciences, just like philosophy or theology. If we see the carpet, this is the largest hand-knotted carpet of the world, with more than, I think, 100,000 knots per square meter, which makes it extremely valuable. And if you walk on it, we can see how really nice it is. Now we arrive to the entrance hall of the deputy room. We will enter, but beforehand I would like to show you the cigar holders, because at the 19th century time the deputies could smoke the cigar, and if a speech was not very interesting, then they could just come out and smoke a cigar. And if a speech was very interesting, you could recognize it because the cigars were very long, since no one was smoking them. Let's enter the hall now. We have now space for 200 people here, but beforehand it was much wider, since today Hungary has 10 million inhabitants, but before 1920 we used to have more than 20 million. This part of the parliament is symmetric to the other part, so the upper chamber where we are now is symmetric, except for the color of the carpet, which used to be blue here because of the blue blood of aristocracy. On the other side it will be red because of the proletariat, and the paintings on the wall are different. If you see the deputy seats, you can see some hole from where the heating is coming. It means that already in the 19th century we had some air conditioning. Heating from the hot spring came from the square, and by ventilation it could heat this chamber. And if you see up, you can see that there are a double ceiling, so it went outside in front of those windows. It was the same in summer. We had some big blocks of ice which were brought to a special chamber under the parliament, and with ventilation an air of 20 degrees were coming in the deputies' room, so that all year round our taker of decision could think in 20-22 degrees, so that they can take the best decision possible.
Coming to you from the islands of Atlantic Canada, Gale Force Winds is a podcast anchored in optimism. Join us for a positive conversation every Tuesday on galeforcewins.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Co-owners and creators Jerry Carew and Alan Dale are seasoned communicators and business development experts. Together, they provide an elegant intersection of quality, speed, and affordable pricing in your media campaign. To learn more, visit galeforcewins.com.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Winds. That's galeforcewins.com.